ask. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our virtual youth series. Today's Tech Track themed topic is Zoom, latest lessons learned. My name is Vanessa Capogreco, and I'll be the facilitator for today's session. Joining us today is our session sponsor, Jennifer Sipos, our Director of Talent Acquisition and Development. So I'll hand it off to Jennifer now to say a few opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thank you for making the time on a Friday. Really appreciate that. I wanted to simply say thank you so much for your commitment to continuous learning and development. As we know, learning is one of the most successful and effective drivers of organizational change. And we've been working together for quite a long time now remotely. And I would say we've learned a lot about how to engage and embrace with technology. So I do want to thank you for taking the time to continuously improve your own skill development, to really leverage your talent, and to continue to help prepare us for the future of work. I'd also like to thank Vanessa, Adam, and Michael for giving of their time and expertise this morning. And I wish you a great session and a wonderful break. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So I'm pleased to introduce our presenters this morning. First, our very own Adam DeProspero, Technical Learning Specialist, who I'm proud to have as a member of my team. We also have a very special guest today, Mike O'Reilly from Classroom Infrastructure Technician, from UIT. And this session is really the result of a great collaboration between the two of them and their experiences with using, teaching, and supporting Zoom. So on that note, please join me in welcoming Adam and Michael, and I'll hand it over to Adam to start us off.
Thank you, Vanessa and Jennifer, for that warm introduction. We designed this session today based on our experiences. So really when things didn't go quite as planned. So some examples, not too long ago, Cheryl was using the breakout rooms feature, or she was planning on using the breakout rooms feature. When she got in the meeting, the button just wasn't there. Okay, another time I was supposed to co-host a meeting, but I couldn't get past the registration page. Had to figure out how to get around that. We'll be talking about that today. And there have also been times where we fumbled kind of going back and forth between our PowerPoint presentation, trying to share a YouTube video, only to find out that once we got the video going, people couldn't hear the audio. Okay, so the idea with this session is we've made the mistakes so you don't have to. All right, so grab a warm drink, sit back, enjoy the session. All right, so if you'd like to ask questions, make comments, please use the chat. Remember, when you're using the chat, send it to everyone. Don't just send it privately to me or Mike, because it's going to be hard when we're presenting to follow up. If you send the questions to everyone, whoever's available will be able to address it. And it just makes it easier for everyone else in the session to see what's going on and get those responses as well. We're going to pause periodically to answer questions verbally. So we'll take a look at select questions from the chat, and we'll answer back out loud to the whole group. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can during the time provided. If there's questions that are very specific to your case, or it might require a complex answer, we might have to follow up with you after the session. If you want, typically in our sessions, as you see on the slide, we're also saying use raise hand, but I think just because such a large number of people are joining us today, we're up to 90 participants right now, it's probably better to post those questions in the chat and let us kind of go through and pick them out that way. Okay, so let's go on to the agenda. This is what we're going to be covering. We're going to start out by looking at the Zoom software itself and some of the key features. So we're going to look at the differences between the Zoom webinar and the Zoom meeting platforms. Okay, we're going to look at some of the key settings to keep in mind when you're configuring your meetings, the kind of things you could plan out in advance before you're actually in your meeting. And we'll also explore some of the top items that come across UIT Service Desk. Next, we're going to move on to some considerations to take when running your Zoom session and how you can make it interactive. So we're going to be looking at new features available with the breakout room tools, And we're going to look at what has worked for us and the different ways we're planning to start using breakout rooms moving forward based off of those new features. We're going to wrap up with a discussion around some of the security considerations and also provide resources on the topics covered in today's sessions. Okay, so for this session, we assume you have a basic knowledge of Zoom and that you have a basic understanding of the common meeting settings, how to kind of get around them. We have a lot to cover, so I won't be able to get into like the step-by-step for all the settings, but instead we have a lot of written and pre-recorded material that we could share with you. On a few slides where I kind of have to gloss over the setting details, I provide a link right there that you can go in and follow up with after. So like with all of our sessions, what I'll be doing is sending out a follow-up email. And in that email, I'll include this PowerPoint that we're going through. So you could use that as a reference. But we're also going to include all the other resources that we have within talent acquisition and a bunch of great resources provided by Mike as well. Okay. So for our first section, I want to focus on the Zoom software, what it's capable of, and what some of the limitations are, some of the things to keep in mind. Okay, so one of the biggest lessons learned that we're hearing from the community is knowing when to use the Zoom meeting platform, what it's capable of, and when you really need to go in a different direction and look at Zoom Webinar, which is another component of the Zoom software. So I'm going to pass it off to Mike now, who's going to talk a little bit about the webinar platform and how it compares and what the differences are, in some cases similarities, with the meeting software. So
Hi, everyone.
Mike.
So thanks very much. I'm glad to be here to help out with this session. So as Adam mentioned, I really want, in UIT, we tend to get a lot of questions about this as well. What's the difference between the meeting platform and the webinar platform? When should I use each one? So just to briefly go through the meeting platform, I'm sure so many of you are familiar with it already. You know, being that we're using it 99% of the time for anything from team meetings to courses to, you know, different tutorial sessions and other presentations. It's been pretty much a mainstay of university operations since March. So of course, it's got the common features you're probably used to with, you know, breakout rooms, you have in-meeting chat, polling, you can cloud record your meetings, which is great if you're faculty or staff. Screen sharing, and it's really designed for, again, that collaborative session where everybody might have something to pitch in, everybody might want to have some sort of contribution to the overall meeting and event. So that's really what you should be keeping in mind for the meeting platform. Now, it's of course limited to 300 participants natively. We can expand it up to 1,000 participants, but there is a fee for that, where the standard meeting license doesn't have a fee. If you wanted to expand your participant limit, there is a charge associated with that. And you can get in contact with us at UIT, and we can help explain that a bit further for you. The webinar platform, on the other hand, is sort of a different use case, and probably the best way to put it would be if everyone's been a part of any of the town halls that the president and the vice presidents have had throughout the course of the pandemic. That's a really great example of the webinar platform, where you have such a huge number of participants in this session, but really it's just, you know, one or, you know, maybe up to 10 even people that are going to be contributing to the overall event. So it's sort of a one-to-many presentation in, you know, sort of a lecture format, where you're going to be presenting information, but you're not expecting to get active contribution necessarily back from your audience, right? So there are some differences, of course, in, I guess, the overall look of the two. And you're certainly, with the presentation style of the webinar platform, you're definitely going to get, for a large scale event, again, certainly a more polished look. And I think one of the best examples I have of this, and I see some of my colleagues from Schulich that are here, they'll remember this back in June when there was a webinar that we hosted for the dean's retirement. And just the scope and complexity of that event really meant that we needed to lock it down as much as possible. We had set speakers that needed to present at set times, and the webinar platform really allowed for us to do that in a very organized and really easy way. You know, the participant count can vary depending on, again, which subscription you decide to purchase, which again can be purchased through UIT, and you can contact us for details on that. But from 100 persons in a webinar up to 10,000, I don't think you would ever need to get to 10,000, but you may have a very popular event. I'm not totally sure what you're going to be hosting, right? In the webinar platform, only hosts and assigned panelists, so think of co-hosts in that regard, but assigned panelists can be seen and heard, whereas participants in the webinar, attendees of the webinar, can't. They can participate through polling, through, you know, there's moderated questions and answers that you can have somebody moderating for you. That's sort of the extent of their contribution. And again, it's available at cost as an annual subscription through UIT. You can get in touch with us for pricing because it does vary from time to time. But something to keep in mind, of course, there are some differences, as I mentioned, between the meeting platform and the webinar platform. Aside from the overall look of it, there are some feature limitations as well. So the breakout room feature is not available. I only mention that because it's a tends to be a very popular item, as Adam's going to touch on later. It doesn't, it unfortunately doesn't exist in that platform. I should say yet. It's a question that I know the vendor's been getting quite often as well. So you never know, but they might introduce that one soon. That's pretty well what I wanted to get through in this. Now there certainly are some other details about the webinar platform that, you know, make it more targeted towards special events or larger scale events. There's, you know, enhanced registration features, some tracking features, branding. You can integrate with some outside services that can help you monetize the event, which is particularly important for maybe alumni events or, you know, areas like continuing studies or, you know, executive education groups that may need that kind of functionality or that kind of tracking. So, you know, feel free to get in touch with us for some more details about that, but that's pretty much the broad strokes of the differences between the two platforms and when you should try and target each.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. So one question that came up is the Q&A feature, the one that you mentioned from webinar, is that available in the Zoom meetings side of things?
It's not. It's not. That's just exclusive to the webinar platform.
All right. Any other questions from our audience here? So feel free to post the questions in the chat. And while Mike's speaking, I'll be in there. I'll try to answer some of them. And I'll bounce back questions to Mike as well for the ones that he might be better equipped to answer. All right, so we're going to move on now. And I think a big thing that, you know, a lot of people don't realize is that there are a number of ways to access your Zoom settings. And one of the things I like to point out are the two apps that we have available here. Okay. And this was one of the lessons learned early on when I started using Zoom. For the longest time, I really only used the Zoom desktop app. And I didn't even know that you can go to the online client and get this whole other set of features. And then I was surprised to hear later on that there are people that were in the opposite situation. They would use the web app and they didn't really know that the Zoom desktop app exists. And it's kind of neat because if you're using web, like a lot of times what happens is someone sends you a meeting invite, you click the link, you don't even realize that this software is running on your desktop. You think everything's just happening through web. So I want to take a few minutes and kind of point out what the differences are. So for the desktop app, I just have some print screens here to help talk through it, but you can access the desktop app by clicking on or searching through your computer, finding the Zoom icon, clicking on it, and it's going to launch. The software, and I'll show you what it looks like. So I'll just drag this over. If you've seen this before, this is the desktop app. Okay, and you could go over to meetings and see a list of your meetings, and you could do a bunch of stuff in here, schedule meetings and so on. So that's what the desktop app looks like. I think what happens in a lot of cases is people see that desktop app when their meeting is running, but once they end the meeting, it kind of all shuts down, closes, and they kind of never see it again. So what you can do And you could even do this at any time right now, even from your start bar. When you see the Zoom icon, you could right click on it and pin it to taskbar. Okay, so when you pin it, even when Zoom closes down completely, you can always access it. Even if you don't do this, anytime in Windows and on Mac as well, you could just search for Zoom and you should find the application there. In terms of the online app, so to access online, you go to yorku.zoom.us. And I think even if you're not familiar with like all of the settings, I think a lot of people have seen this page before, the yorku.zoom.us page. And I've used this many times, but the thing that I didn't realize at first was the sign in button up here. Okay, when you click on sign in, you log in with your Passport York, and it takes you to this whole other menu filled with all kinds of other settings. So I'm going to flip the slide here, and I'll show you some of those, some of the reasons why you might want to log in and see those settings. First, this is where you go if you want to pre-assign breakout rooms. Okay, if you haven't heard of this feature, it's really useful if you're working with a large group of people, but you know in advance how you want to split them up into smaller groups. Okay, so you can see here, once you log into yorku.zoom.us, you can click on your meeting. You'll see a full list of all of your meetings, and you're going to see the meeting options. And this is where you go to enable the breakout room pre-assign. You can create the rooms in advance, and you can start choosing who gets assigned to which room. Okay, so it's really neat. This is also the only place you could really go to modify the chat session settings. So again, early on, we were running a session. We were trying to paste useful links for all of our participants, only to find out that people couldn't copy and paste the links. They couldn't even click on them. So what do we expect them to do? Type out these long links manually? No, you want to be able to click it, right? So that setting, being able to copy and paste links, is tied to this right here, this prevent participants from saving chat. So how Zoom has had it set up, if you don't want anyone to save chat messages, well, that also means you don't want them to copy and paste and select the messages as well. So if this is a problem you've run into, or if this is something you want to get ahead of, make sure to go onto the online client and uncheck that checkbox there. This is also where you can get more control over how the recording works in Zoom. Okay, so you can choose whether or not you want to capture the gallery view, just the speaker view, or share your screen and leave out people from the recording completely. So now we have a user story. So one of my colleagues explained that they were recording a meeting, and they wanted to record the meeting as like this walkthrough for a new software. And they wanted to be able to take that recording and kind of share it with the community, right? So she realized after doing the recording that her recording captured the gallery view as well. And so you have people eating, making funny faces, you know, all those natural, strange things that humans do, right? Well, thankfully, it was a small group. No one did anything too embarrassing. It was a good laugh. But after that, she realized, okay, let's go into the settings and only share the screen share. Okay, we're only going to record the screen share. And also, you know, you can decide, do you want to see the presenter in there or the active speaker? So you can kind of see here, you get a sense of what settings are available. Okay, so again, all of these, they're only available on the web client. Now the desktop client, if I move this over here as well, you get a different set of settings with the desktop client. So if I click on the settings button, you can see here, this is really more about your experience using Zoom. So you can configure how the screen sharing works, how your video works there, if you want to use your backgrounds and filters and things like that. Okay, so sometimes you're going to find overlap between the two, but often cases, if you can't find a setting in one area, go check out the opposite and see what you could find in there. All right, I'll touch base with Mike and Vanessa to see if anything came up in chat that we can mention right now about the online settings.
I believe right now we're going to cover, there were some questions about logging in to the desktop application with Passport York, and I think we're going to cover that in a couple of slides.
Yep.
But on this specific topic, I think we're
just came in. It said for the web-based settings, do we need to set up for each meeting, for example, breakout rooms? I don't always use breakout rooms.
Okay, yeah, good question. So in some cases, so how the settings work, like this meeting options over here, these settings are specific for that particular meeting, but they're also like what I'll refer to as like global options. So you set it once and it's applying to all the meetings. So something like breakout rooms, which I think is just enabled by default, and it might even be like administrator controlled where you can't even turn it off. But something like that is just available across all of your meetings. If it is something you can turn on, you turn it on once, and you don't have to go each time into every meeting to modify that. Okay. So let's move on here if there aren't any other questions.
Sorry, there is one. Let me just ask. I don't know if you're going to get to it. There was a question on sharing. If you share this account with colleagues in the office, if we change a setting, it affects everyone's meetings or webinars.
I would say don't make sure not to share your actual account, like your Passport York account. But what I'm imagining they're talking about is if you have you're setting up meetings on behalf of you're using the scheduling assistant. And for that, what I believe is that, well, I would say just to be safe, check with that other person. So if you've configured your Zoom settings a certain way and you've booked a meeting for someone else, check in with them to confirm that whatever settings are on your end, they're seeing those as well. So for example, it might be something like the pre-assigned breakout rooms. I'm pretty sure that if you've configured pre-assigned breakout rooms, you're scheduling the meeting on behalf of another person, that they should see all of that. But it's always best just to make sure, because I'm sure there's different settings in Zoom where they might not all work exactly the same, right? So take a little bit of time, check it out in advance. All right. So we're going to go on to our registration feature, which is another feature that's available in the online settings only. Same idea. I put some print screens here to show you how this works. First, what you do is after you've created a meeting, you can either do this while you're setting it up. You can check off this required checkbox for your registration. Or if you didn't do it, you can go in and edit a meeting and then turn on registration as well. And then once you've turned it on, you're going to get this other area at the bottom of your registration page, at the bottom of your meeting page rather, that allows you to view who is registered and then also edit the registration page. So let's say I create a meeting, I set up my registration page. I haven't even advertised the meeting yet. What I can do is click on the edit button and I can go and set up specific registration questions. Okay. I'm not going to get into the specifics on how to set it up right now. I put this link over here and you can go through it afterwards, and it provides a really nice breakdown of when you would want to use the registration settings, how to set it up, and kind of a feel for what it looks like. I mean, you're all here right now, so you've seen the registration from the user end of things. You went through the registration process there. So as great as the registration is, there was a hard lesson learned from us early on with it. Alternative hosts cannot register for their own meetings. Okay, so I'll give you the scenario. Cheryl sets up a meeting. It's one of our technical learning. And when she sets up the meeting, she gets a pop-up on her screen from Outlook saying, this is the meeting. And she goes and she adds me as an attendee to that Outlook invite. And in that Outlook invite, it contains a link to the meeting. So we went along, a couple weeks later, went to access the meeting, and I clicked on that link and it takes me to a registration page. So I think, okay, this is strange. I'm the host. Why would, or the co-host rather, why would I have to register? So I fill out the info only to get this message at the top: host cannot register. So at this point, it's like 5 minutes before the meeting. I'm kind of panicking. And I end up putting, what we figured out is I put in a different email address. So Zoom recognizes that this address is listed as an alternative host. So I put in my personal, I was able to get in. Now that's the workaround. Really what you should be doing is, what I missed at the time, when Cheryl added me as the alternative host, I got an email saying, and I'll just flip the slide exactly like this. So it said, hi, Cheryl invited you to this meeting as alternative host, and it had all the proper links in there. So I could add it to my calendar, start the meeting, and so on. So this is what you want to look out for. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that this goes into the junk mail. I think now it's a lot better. This was happening early on, but now I'm getting these messages to my inbox. If you use the Outlook filtered or the focused view, you might have to go into the other tab to access that. Okay. As the host, if you're the person setting up a meeting and you have alternative hosts, what I would recommend is shoot off an email to them and just make sure they got that message. So I did that this morning. I reached out to Vanessa, Mike, and to Jennifer just to make sure they got it so we didn't have any problems, right? How embarrassing would that be? We're supposed to be the Zoom experts and we can't even get in our own meetings. So thankfully everyone made it in. We got our emails and it's all fine. Okay, so I'm going to go on to another section here, and then I'm just going to cover some of this because it's related. And then what we can do is take some questions. So one of the things with Zoom is that there are different user roles. Okay, so who can do what in the meeting? And this isn't an official term by any means, but I'm going to refer to something that I'll say is the true host or the actual host of a meeting. Because we have these terms. We have host, alternate host, co-host. Okay, what are the differences? So I'm going to try my best to explain it as clearly as I can, but there's a link over here, and Zoom does a great job of breaking it down and putting it in this nice table over here, listing all the differences between host, co-host, and participants who can do what. But there's a few points that I really want to drive home here. So the true host of the meeting is the person who has either scheduled the meeting for themselves. So let's say any of us, we go into Zoom, we create a meeting. So you get this schedule meeting and you set it up. Okay, so if you've done that, you're the actual host of the meeting. That's one case. Or if you have someone that's scheduling the meeting for you and you're specifically using this schedule for dropdown. Okay, so in this case, let's say I'm scheduling the meeting for Starling Teacher. That is now the true host of the meeting. Okay, it's not the person that's listed in the alternative host area. Okay, so the alternative host is not the actual host of the meeting. And so what? What does that matter? What does that mean? Well, the alternative host can't do the following things. So they can't configure or edit the meeting settings prior to the meeting. So they don't even see the meeting in their Zoom client. Okay, so that means they can't set up registration that we just saw, or they can't manage any of the registration stuff either. They also can't set up polls in advance, all right? Alternative hosts can start the meeting in advance, they can run breakout rooms, and they can run the polls during the meeting, provided someone else has set them up, okay? Just to make things a little more complicated, there's also this co-host role. Okay, so right now, Vanessa, Mike, and Jennifer, they're the co-hosts of the meeting. So the co-host has to be assigned during the meeting, okay? If you assign someone as alternative host, they're also gonna get that co-host flag as well. And basically what it means is they can do a few extra things above and beyond what regular participants can't do, right? So they can do things like mute everyone. They can manage the polls as well, and a couple of other things. Okay, so that's like just at a high level. I don't want to take up too much time with it, but just something to be aware of. Okay, so if you walk away with anything from the session, just be aware that these three roles, sometimes you might think, oh, I've assigned someone as alternative host. They should have no problems doing A, B, and C. Well, they might actually run into issues. So if this is something that you're thinking about, when we send out the follow-up email, make sure to click on that link there, and then you get the breakdown over there. So I'm just looking at the time. I see we're at 11:30. We still have a lot more to get through, but I'll just check in with Vanessa and Mike to see maybe we could take one question from the chat, if there are any related to the topic.
One that just came in, you can only have one true host, correct?
Yeah, so again, when I say true host, I mean the person that could go in and actually see all of the meeting settings in advance. I believe so. I'll wait to see if Mike's going to jump in with any other information there, but I believe that's the case. When you're in the meeting itself, there's also only one person who has that host title that has like full control. And so what that means, we're going to get into this a little later. Right now, breakout rooms, for example, this is going to change, but this is just an example I'll use historically. Only the host can use breakout rooms. So in that case where Cheryl wasn't able to see the breakout rooms button is because she was the co-host of the meeting. So in that case, what you have to do is the person who happens to have that host listing, they can click on someone else. So I would click on Robin Teacher and I can make them the host. So I'm not making two hosts. It's not me and Robin Teacher. I'm transferring my hosting ability to Robin. Okay, so that's how that works.
Just one more quick question that maybe you
Sure.
can answer related. Is the Schedule 4 on the web or desktop version?
Thankfully, that's one that's available on both. Okay, but in order to get to it, let me bring up my Zoom page over here. You have to enable the setting. Okay, so I'll see if I can quickly do this. If I can't quickly do it, I apologize, and I can follow up in the email. But now I'm in the Zoom settings area, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a scheduling privilege section over here. Okay, and I'll just zoom in a bit here. So you can see here, I've assigned scheduling privileges to Glenda and to this other email. So these individuals can schedule for me. Okay, so it's kind of a two-step process. The person who's going to be the host of the meeting, they have to grant the scheduling privilege to someone else. Okay, and if someone were to want me to schedule for them, they would have to go into their Zoom settings and set it up and say, grant Adam the ability to schedule. Once they do that, I would see that over here. Okay, so you go into the Zoom settings and you set that up in advance. And then once you do that, you see it in both areas. You can see it on the web client, but then you can also see it on the desktop client as well. So if I were to go over here and I would schedule a meeting under right up here, schedule 4, I could see the list of the individuals. Okay, and this gets around so many problems of those alternative host issues and people not being able to set up polls and everything else. So scheduling privileges is a really powerful tool and something to consider if you're running into those issues. Okay, let's go on to our next topic. We found that it's really important to understand the relationship between Zoom and Outlook. So the main point is that Zoom does not really have any data regarding who you've invited to the meeting, who's going to be attending it. Even though there's a registration feature, that's still separate from what you're seeing in Outlook with like all of the attendees, okay? So here's another story. One of our clients, I'm not gonna say who because they're setting up a surprise party, so no spoilers. And they needed help understanding how they would invite all these people to the party without actually alerting the guest of honor. Okay, so if you think about it for a second, it's kind of a tricky thing. Typically, we schedule a meeting in Zoom. It opens up in Outlook, right? We get that Outlook page and we put in all the participants. In this case, what Cheryl did was instruct the person to set up one invite that didn't include the guest of honor, but then take the same Zoom link, okay, so they're taking that link. This has nothing to do with Outlook. This is the Zoom link, and then create a separate Outlook invite that contains the guest of honor, maybe a couple of other people, maybe set it up as like a performance review or something, like some different meeting type, right? So to really throw them off the trail. But the point is none of those other attendees that are supposed to be at the surprise party are in there, okay? If the guest of honor opens that meeting in their Outlook, they're not going to see anyone else. And then the flip is true as well. All those participants, when they open it, they're not going to see the guest of honor in there. Okay. So just to kind of sum it up and make it quick, Zoom is like the physical space that the meeting is going to take place. And it doesn't really know, like your meeting room, the physical meeting room doesn't really have any idea of who's going to be attending, right? Outlook is the part that handles the scheduling, handles the invites. It's responsible for actually tracking the attendees, okay? So I hope that helps to kind of clear that up a bit. We get questions around that like quite often, and I think it's important to share these kind of deals with the community. So I'll stop there for another quick second and see if we have any questions. And then after that, I'm going to pass it off to Mike to talk about some of the other support questions that come in. through
Hi,
UIT
Adam.
Chrome. Yep.
There was one that said there is no way to BCC attendees. Everyone can see who have all been invited. This is for when I want to invite students and do not want everyone to see their email addresses.
Yeah, I guess not. I guess if it's like an actual Outlook meeting, I don't think so. And now I'm kind of wishing Cheryl was around, because Cheryl would probably have the answer to that. So I think what we can do is look into that and see. But to my knowledge, I don't think there's a way in Outlook to invite people to the meeting without the other people seeing it, aside from creating like all separate invites. Another way of doing it, though it's not so elegant, is to send out an email instead. And in the email, you have the Zoom link. But then in that case, what would happen is you would be asking your participants to take that link and kind of schedule their own meeting. So yeah, we can follow up on that to see if there's any other more elegant solution.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Mike, who is going to get into some of the top support questions. And I'm just going to, I'm going to go on mute here and I'll let Mike take over 1 second.
Sorry, my computer actually froze there for a second. So we're back. So I just wanted to go through some of the top support questions that we get in. We have a small Zoom support team that's been helping to manage the large flow of questions that we tend to get. And a lot of them tend to follow sort of the same line, and they fall into a few different groups. And we get an outlier from time to time, which is always nice, but these are the ones that we tend to see the most. The biggest one by far, the first one that I mentioned here, failing to authenticate when hosting meetings or accessing recordings. I guess further to a question that was posed in the chat before regarding and even for this one, actually, for this particular session, you had to log in to be able to join this meeting, right? You had to be able to log into your YorkU account to be able to properly properly join. A lot of people tend not to do that. So it's always a really good idea to be able to remind your guests ahead of time. If you've enabled this setting, and I'm going to show you in just a second, if you've enabled this setting, make sure that you remind them that they actually need to log in ahead of time. And that could be logging into the desktop application. That can be logging into the webpage at yorku.zoom.us. Either way, just making sure that you've done that ahead of time is always going to, it's not going to hurt anything, that's for sure. It's only going to help you out and make sure that you have a seamless meeting experience. I'm just going to skip ahead a slide here, and I'll come back to the other one in a second, about logging into Zoom. This was another question that actually came up before, and I said we'd get to it, and here we are. So logging into Zoom with your Passport York account. As you can see, when you open Zoom, and some of you may have experienced this already, when you open Zoom on the desktop, you're going to be presented with a screen that asks you to enter your email and enter your password. I'm going to ask you to pretend that that part doesn't exist, because largely for us, it doesn't. What you want to be clicking, as you can see over here, the red square, sign in with SSO. And it'll take you to the next screen here, which is saying company domain on top. Just enter YorkU and click continue. And that's going to open up a Passport York login page for you, where you'll enter your Passport York credentials as you normally would. And as soon as you enter that, and you authenticate correctly, it's going to launch the Zoom desktop application for you. You don't have to do anything else. And so everything is done securely through Passport York. Zoom doesn't have access to any of that information besides the email address, which is what we want, right? So that's how you'd be logging into the desktop application. And again, I always recommend doing it before starting a meeting, just to make sure that you don't have any problems joining, that you don't have any problems viewing the recording afterwards. Some persons have set their recordings just so internal persons can see them. So just make sure that you're always keeping that in mind. The next one that we get, adding a webinar license to an account. This comes in quite a bit. Again, I went over some of the brief details between the webinar platform and the meeting platform earlier on, being that webinars are available as part of an annual subscription. They are an additional cost where the meeting license doesn't cost anything. And so when you submit a ticket to askit@yorku.ca requesting a webinar license, our team is going to try and explain that to you and see if there's based on the use case that you're presenting, if there's a way that we can make the meeting platform work for you. Because obviously we don't want you to spend any money. We don't make a commission on this. So if we can save you some money on this, we'd really like to be able to help you out with that. Again, there are times where the webinar platform is called for. So they can be purchased again as part of an annual subscription, but they can also be used as one-off rentals through UIT. The LTS support group, which is a part of UIT, has a couple of webinar add-ons that they're able to lend out. Again, there's a charge associated with that. You'd have to get in touch with them as it varies from, it could certainly vary from time to time. They also have managed support where they can have somebody actually a part of the webinar handling things like your chat, handling all the setup and the, the various moderation, as well as any technical support for some of your users that are going to be joining that may encounter some problems, right? So again, when you do submit a ticket to us, just explain the use case right away. We're going to send you all the costs and everything involved, but we really want to help you out and make sure that you're not spending any money if you don't have to. The Zoom Marketplace applications. We do get a lot of these in, and some of you may not have ever seen it. There is a separate application marketplace for Zoom where third-party developers have created all kinds of different apps, all kinds of different integrations. And that could be companies like Microsoft, which have created them for Teams, Google for Gmail, but a whole bunch of other ones you may never have heard of either. So many, such as Eventbrite, Salesforce, and others, in particular, they require that the entire Zoom account, York's entire Zoom account, be linked to one specific application account. So, if I sign up for an Eventbrite account and I want to link it to my Zoom account, I have to actually link it to the entire York platform, which isn't practical, of course. It doesn't make any sense, but that's unfortunately the way it's set up. These applications also typically require us to grant permissions that would give those third-party services access to potentially private information without any agreement in place for its use or protection, and without the approval of the other 60,000-ish users on the York Zoom account. So we, as you can expect, based on what I've just said, we do not enable those integrations. We don't approve them. You can go in and try and request them, but you're typically going to get a negative response, again, based on those reasons that I've outlined, because of the security concerns that we have about many of them. Since UIT doesn't support those applications, it's very difficult for us to integrate them with a service that we do support without creating some sort of problems. So just keep that in mind. You can always submit a support ticket about it. We can try and see what we can do, but largely we're unable to integrate with any of those things that you might see on the marketplace if you've gone there. And missing in-meeting features, and we're going to get to this in a slide later on as well, but it's important to reinforce that you always, always, always want to make sure that you have updated your desktop and mobile client. Updates are typically released from Zoom about once or twice a month, depending on what new features or patches they've released. And it only takes a minute to check for it. And again, there'll be some screenshots further down that'll show us how to do it, but it's very quick and strongly recommended, especially before you have a really important meeting where you're planning to use some of the cool new features like select your own breakout room or something like that, right? Where everybody needs to be on the latest version of Zoom to be able to get that feature. Some users with department managed PCs, I should mention, may have some security features enabled by the persons who manage those PCs that prevent them from actually updating any program on their computer. And so if you encounter that issue, just submit a note to UIT, askit@yorku.ca, and the appropriate support team can help address that issue and help get that desktop client updated for you. That is pretty much it for those specific support questions. I did just want to mention when you do submit a support ticket, as you can see at the very bottom there, subject Zoom, description, can you help? That's not an exaggeration because that is a ticket that I've received many times. And I'm guilty of it too. When I call, Bell sometimes, I'll say, my internet's not working. And like, great, okay, well, why isn't it working? Like, what other problems are you encountering, right? And what you want to do when you're submitting a support ticket, not just to UIT, but to anybody, provide as much information as you can, as much detail as you possibly can on the problem that you're experiencing, from when it started to is it affecting everything? You know, is there more than one person affected by it? Any information that you can give us is only going to help the situation get resolved that much faster, right? We want to make sure that we're offering as efficient a service as possible, and making sure that your meeting and that your day is proceeding exactly as you'd planned. So the more information that you can get to us, the better it's going to be, and the faster your problem is going to be resolved.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. There's one question that came up that I think we missed. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but in the online settings, you cannot enable breakout rooms if you have remote support enabled. What is remote support? Is that something you can answer now?
Yeah, I can dive into that quickly. Remote support is, well, it's sort of exactly what it sounds like, actually, where I can join a remote support session where I'd be taking over control of your desktop, and I can help you troubleshoot a variety of things, not just Zoom. It could be other computer issues that you might be having. And so when you do enter a remote support session, with that in mind, given that you are giving that remote support person access to pretty much everything on your desktop, you should be really careful and ensure that it's someone that that you trust, be it someone within UIT or your local support group. So I believe a new patch has actually been released that you should be able to enable both, but you can only use one at any given time within a meeting. Given that remote support sessions are typically one-on-one, you shouldn't encounter that issue, but just something to keep in mind. I can provide some more detail on that later on if anyone wants to send a ticket in about that. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Mike. And if you can go back once you're done presenting, there are some questions we might have missed in the chat that you're probably the best person to answer. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just one thing that came up in the chat about the only allowing authenticated users. It's kind of hidden a bit. If that is something you want to use to restrict it down to Passport York, you have to go to advanced options and then check off only authenticated users. And then from there, you can choose whether it's any Zoom account or Passport York. If you're hosting meetings with external people, then yeah, by all means, like I think in most cases, really only authenticating to Zoom accounts is the ideal way to go. We lock it down to Passport York specifically because we need people to log in with their Passport York so we can update your employee training record. So this is where you go to access those settings. You have to check this off, and you get that additional box there. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go kind of quick through the remainder of the content, but keep in mind we do have all of these resources that we're going to make available for you. So big things coming for breakout rooms. 2 new features we're going to be seeing. These first 2 are already available. So allowing participants to choose their own rooms, and then allowing participants to go back to the main meeting room. Okay, coming soon. And I believe if you update your Zoom now, you're going to be able to get this. Co-hosts can now control breakout rooms. So this is going to get around so many problems. The user story over here is just exactly what I said earlier. Cheryl was trying to run her meeting, couldn't see the breakout rooms. Well, it turns out someone else joined the meeting that was also an alternative host, like our backup staff. You know, we usually add Vanessa, I'm in there, Glenda's in there as alternative host, but one of us was in there just to attend the session, and Cheryl didn't realize that, and they ended up taking the host ability. So luckily they figured it out, and they're able to reassign the host back. Thankfully, once we're all updated on the latest version, we're not going to have to worry about this anymore, because even those co-hosts are going to get those settings. So now going back to these points, like, so what? Why does it matter if we can allow participants to choose their own room and go back to the meeting? Well, the neat thing that we're very excited to try out with this is the World Cafe methodology of running meetings. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar, World Cafe is a methodology to host a large group dialogue. It's a process for knowledge sharing in which groups of people can discuss a topic at a bunch of small tables, okay? So kind of like if you're in a cafe. With this World Cafe setup, the participants in your meeting get to go into different breakout rooms, and they talk about whatever the topic is. And from there, maybe it's like every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, they can switch and go into a different meeting. So to do this, the first step is, of course, you have to be on the latest version of Zoom. And then you get this option, let participants choose room. Once you check that off, the host is able to go in and actually set up a bunch of different rooms. And what I've done here, these are the rooms, and I set up different categories. So the first room is specifically about goals, the next room is about growth, and so on. And then from there, the host can message people if they're in those specific rooms, give them instruction. I'm going to flip it over to show you what it looks like from the participant view. So as a participant, you could join any room you want. So maybe, you know what, I don't want to talk about goals to start off with. I want to talk about inspiration. That's one that's on my mind. So I'm going to join this group. There's going to be a few other people in there. We have our conversation. And then when I want, or if I'm instructed to switch, every 5 minutes, I can click on my breakout room button. Again, this is as a participant. So this is really new. You're probably not used to even seeing the breakout room button there as a participant. You can now say choose. You see that list again, and then you can join a different group. Okay. You can also just click leave breakout room, which is where that leave button is in the bottom right corner, and use that to get back into your main room there rather. So this is what Mike was referring to earlier. You have to make sure you're on the latest Zoom version. There's a check for updates button when you're in your app. So I'll bring up my app right here. We can see this is our desktop app, and it's just a matter of clicking on your icon or your initials in the top right corner. And then from there, you have a check for updates button. Don't do this now. It might kick you out of the meeting. So do this after our session. All right, there's some other breakout room ideas that I want to quickly go over. Breakout rooms are excellent for group work, actually getting things done. They're great for conversations, but we've been using it within TAD. A while back, we were doing our planning meetings, and we got into groups. We set like a long time, like 25-minute time in the breakout room, and used that with a combination of a shared document. And we were all kind of in our little groups, editing a document, making our notes. Time's up, you go back to the big group, everyone has like some portion of that done, and it's really neat to see. It's a great process. A few notes on screen sharing really quickly. You can now change your computer sound and your video clip settings directly from your screen share. So at any point you could click on the more button in your screen share, and you can this is a big one. I'm sharing my screen right now. I'm doing stuff that's all text-based. That's great. I get to a video, and what I can do, instead of quitting out of my screen share, changing some settings and jump back in, on the fly, I can go and then optimize for sharing the video clip. Now you might think, well, why don't I just optimize and leave that setting on the whole time? If you do that, it doesn't prioritize the text in your screen share. So all your text is going to look blurry. Everything else is going to be so clear. So what we recommend is really only using this the setting here when you're sharing a video clip. And of course, share your computer sound so everyone in there can hear the sound from your content as well. Final tip, you can adjust as participants in meetings, and this is something that I'm gonna play around with a little more, but you can change the view options as a participant and zoom in. So if you're having trouble seeing the content of a meeting, you can zoom in, and you can also check off this follow presenters view, presenter's pointer. So if you're zoomed in quite a bit, you could then go in and like really follow it around. So I'm going to leave it there. We have a couple more things, but I see we only have 5 minutes left. I want to see if maybe Mike can just pick out the top security. I'm sure there's not that many security considerations with Zoom, but pick out one or two, and if we can quickly do that, because we still have to do the survey as well.
Yeah, I'm going to try and hammer through some of these as quickly as possible. I guess some of the bigger issues that have come out of Zoom over the course of the year has been the idea of Zoom bombing, of persons coming in, malicious persons coming in and disrupting your meeting just for the sake of disrupting your meeting, because they're that kind of people who just want to cause problems, I guess. So what I strongly recommend to everybody, when you are scheduling a meeting, make sure that you're using passwords. You consider enabling the waiting room, which can be really difficult for larger meetings exceeding 100 people. It can take a lot of work to actually manage that. Or consider using the registration feature, especially for larger events that you are going to be publicizing the link to on something like Twitter or Facebook or some other public facing website. Registration is also going to help you out, help you collect a lot of information from your event to be able to follow up with people with surveys or with additional information. So I strongly recommend that for special events that you're going to be advertising. Also ensure that you're using a lot of those host controls like mute upon entry. You can try and have a colleague be a moderator for larger events that are using the meeting platform. Just managing people's if individuals have to speak at certain times, you can give them the permission to do that, the permission to unmute. And there are some other features in there as well, some other new security features that have come in. But I think with the time that I have, that's probably the best thing that I can touch on. Just make sure that you're setting up your meeting as securely as possible to make sure that you're not going to have any sort of disruptions like this. And with larger events that are using the webinar platform, typically you won't have to worry about this. But for the meeting platform, which is more open, designed to be more collaborative, you can definitely encounter problems like this unless you use those features, in which case you're going to have a much better experience.
Thanks, Michael. There was a question that I believe I know the answer, but I don't want to try. There are times I've entered a meeting without it asking for the password, even though there is a password set up for that meeting. Is that because they clicked on the encrypted link?
Likely, yes.
Yeah. So what happens is if the host requires a password, what happens is the link for the meeting is much more encrypted. And so if they click on the link, you're not actually required to enter the password. You're welcome. There's a question where the alternative host can be anyone, or does it have to be a YorkU employee?
It has to be someone as part of the YorkU account. You can assign a co-host in meeting that's not part of the York account, but to pre-assign it when you're scheduling, they have to be part of the York account. So yes, typically a York employee, staff, faculty, or student.
Okay. Adam, is there one more? You have 2 more minutes. Do you want to just wrap up?
Wow, we did it. We got there. We covered everything we needed to cover within the hour. So it's nice and sunny outside, it looks like. Just want to take the last minute, I guess. We have the post-session survey, which I'll post in the chat here, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. So while Adam is putting the post-session survey in the chat, I just want to thank you so much. Thank both of you. Whenever I think I've gotten a good handle on Zoom, I'm humbly reminded that there's so much still to learn. And so I hope all of you feel the same, that you got some good information. We are going to save the chat. So if there's something that we didn't have the opportunity to answer, either verbally or through the chat, then we'll follow up with you after the fact. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all a very happy holiday and hope to see you soon in the new year for our next Virtual U series. Please join us. And if we really do appreciate your feedback, so please take a few moments to fill in the post-session survey before you head out and have lunch. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Adam, will you send that post review survey in your